History is usually written in dates, treaties, and battles. But sometimes the deepest scars are psychological, etched into the mind of an empire long after the swords have gone quiet. This is not just the story of a rebellion. It is the story of fear so powerful that a superpower desecrated a grave, believing bones could steal back what it had lost. To understand that fear, we must follow the life of a man the Ottomans could conquer, but never truly own. Imagine the scene. The year is 1478. Beneath the shattered roof of a ruined church in occupied Albania, a group of Ottoman janissaries, the most feared and disciplined soldiers of their age, have descended into madness. Marble fragments litter the floor. A tomb has been smashed open with hammers, not for gold, not for jewels, but for bones. They claw through dust and rot, shoving one another aside like animals. One man tears free a finger bone. Another hides a rib beneath his tunic. They believe these remains carry power. They believe that wearing a piece of this corpse will make them invincible in battle. This is no saint's grave. This is the tomb of Skanderbeg. 10 years after his death, the Ottoman Empire still feared him so deeply that its soldiers were willing to desecrate his remains, convinced they could steal his strength. How does one man haunt a superpower beyond the grave? How does a stolen child rise to become an empire's greatest weapon, only to turn that weapon inward and tear it apart? To understand the rage, you must first understand the theft. The Ottoman Empire did not merely conquer territory. It harvested children. This system was known as the devshirme, the blood tax. Ottoman agents stormed Christian villages, inspected boys like livestock, and dragged away the strongest to be reshaped into servants of the Sultan. They were stripped of language, faith, and family, then reforged into janissaries, elite soldiers loyal to no one but the throne. In 1423, the collectors arrived for something rare. They did not want a peasant. They wanted a prince. Their target was the youngest son of Gjergj Kastrioti, the defiant Lord of Gjergj, a man who had plagued the Sultan for decades. The boy's name was Gjergj. He was 18 years old. But kidnapping was only the beginning of the tragedy. Gjergj had 3 older brothers, Ripash, Stanisha, and Konstantin. They too were taken, hostages meant to break their father's resistance. None survived. Whispers spread through the court that they had been quietly poisoned. Gjergj was left alone, the last Kastrioti heir, trapped among his family's executioners. Picture the silent fury of that young man, standing in the halls of those who had murdered his blood. Yet he did not rebel. He endured. The Ottomans trained him relentlessly, archery, swordsmanship, command, strategy, until they believed his past had been erased. He converted to Islam. He was renamed Iskender Bey, Lord Alexander. For 20 years, he wore Ottoman colors. He led their cavalry. He governed their provinces. He became the Sultan's favored wolf, fed by his hand. And all the while, he waited. The moment came on November 3rd, 1443, at the Battle of Niš. Hungarian Crusader forces under John Hunyadi tore through Ottoman lines. The battlefield collapsed into smoke, blood, and screaming horses. This time, Skanderbeg did not charge forward. Instead, he signaled. 300 Albanian cavalrymen, men who had waited years for this moment, broke formation and turned away from the fight. But Skanderbeg did not flee empty-handed. He needed a key. Amid the chaos, he hunted down the keeper of the imperial seal. In the shadows of a tent, blade pressed to the man's throat, Skanderbeg demanded a forged decree, an official order transferring control of the fortress of Gjergj to him. The terrified scribe complied. Skanderbeg took the document and silenced him forever. For 7 days, he rode through enemy territory, bluffing his way past checkpoints with stolen authority and a general's uniform. When he reached Gjergj, he did not besiege it. He walked to the gate, presented the decree, and watched as the governor bowed and surrendered the keys. It was one of the greatest deceptions in military history. That night, Skanderbeg tore down the Ottoman crescent and raised a red banner bearing a black double-headed eagle, the symbol of his lost family. The slaughter that followed was swift. With help from locals, his men wiped out the garrison in their sleep. By dawn, the Sultan's wolf was gone. A dragon had risen in Albania. But victory sobered quickly. Skanderbeg knew retaliation was inevitable. The Ottoman war machine was already moving, grain stockpiled, cannons cast, death warrants signed. Worse still, Albania was not a nation. It was a mosaic of feuding clans who trusted no one. To them, Skanderbeg looked like the enemy. So he did not command them. He persuaded them. In March of 1444, he summoned Albania's lords to Lezhë, neutral Venetian ground. They came armed, suspicious, expecting demands. Instead, Skanderbeg spoke of survival. He warned them of the janissaries, the artillery, the extinction rushing toward their valleys. He reminded them that petty feuds meant nothing in the face of annihilation. And then he delivered the line that changed everything. "I did not bring you liberty. I found it here among you." Thus was born the League of Lezhë, a fragile alliance united by fear, land, and one man's vision. Outnumbered beyond reason, Skanderbeg turned geography into a weapon. He abandoned heavy armor, trained lightning-fast guerrilla units, and turned forests, passes, and rivers into death traps. Signal fires warned him of enemy movements before camps were pitched. The first test came quickly. In 1444, an Ottoman army marched into the Torviol Valley, confident, careless. They never saw the ambush coming. The valley became a grave. Europe reeled. But Skanderbeg did not celebrate. He knew this was only the beginning. When Sultan Mehmed II finally came himself in 1450, bringing an army of 100,000 and monstrous cannons, Skanderbeg made his boldest choice yet. He abandoned his capital. Leaving a skeleton garrison inside Gjergj, he vanished into the forests and turned the siege into a nightmare. Night after night, his men struck like ghosts, burning tents, cutting supply lines, screaming into the darkness before disappearing. The Ottomans could not sleep. They could not eat. Disease spread. Morale collapsed. An empire rotted beneath castle walls that refused to fall. Murad had miscalculated. He had brought steel, fire, and numbers. But he could not kill loyalty. And that, in the end, was Skanderbeg's greatest weapon. By October 1450, winter was closing in fast. Snow crept down from the mountains, sealing the passes one by one. The Ottoman supply lines had been shredded beyond repair, and what remained of the once mighty siege camp had turned into something grim and contagious. Hunger gnawed at the soldiers. Disease spread through the tents. Morale collapsed under the weight of exhaustion and fear. And Sultan Mehmed II, the man who had crushed crusades and bent kingdoms to his will, was forced to face an unthinkable truth. He could not win. From below the cliffs of Gjergj, Murad stared upward at the red banner with the black double-headed eagle still flying defiantly above the walls. It was a silent accusation. With clenched teeth, he gave the order to withdraw. The retreat began slowly, painfully, a march of shame rather than strategy. This was not a defeat at the hands of an army, but a defeat inflicted by stone walls, forests, and one relentless man. Murad never recovered. The humiliation and physical toll of the siege broke him. Within months, the Sultan was dead. Across Europe, the news detonated like thunder. A rebellion, small, isolated, dismissed, had not only survived. It had broken the will of the Ottoman ruler himself. In Rome, the Pope proclaimed Skanderbeg the champion of Christendom. In Naples, Venice, and Hungary, his name was toasted as if he were already legend. But in the mountains of Albania, Skanderbeg did not celebrate, because he understood what the rest of Europe did not. Murad's death did not mean peace. It meant succession. The Ottoman throne passed to his son, Mehmed II. Young, brilliant, ruthless, history would remember him as the Conqueror. And unlike his father, Mehmed did not merely want Skanderbeg defeated. He wanted him erased. There was history between them. They had grown up in the same imperial world, learned the same languages of power, maneuvered through the same courts. This war was no longer distant or abstract. It had become personal, a duel of pride, memory, and hatred. Skanderbeg had won a round, but the real fight was just beginning. They say the deadliest blade is the one held by someone who once stood at your side. In 1455, Skanderbeg faced a danger no wall could stop: betrayal. To understand the weight of that moment, you must understand Moise Galami. Moise was not merely a general. He was Skanderbeg's closest lieutenant, a commander trusted with independent armies, a veteran of Torviol and Kruj, a man the soldiers revered. If Skanderbeg was the heart of the rebellion, Moise was its right arm. Mehmed II understood that men like Skanderbeg were hardest to defeat directly. So he chose another path. He opened his treasury. His agents approached Moise with an offer as seductive as it was corrosive: power, wealth, titles, rule under the empire instead of bleeding for a rebel in a land of stone. No one knows exactly what broke Moise. Jealousy, fatigue, greed, perhaps all three. But Moise defected. He rode to Istanbul, bowed before Mehmed, and accepted command of an Ottoman army. The shock that followed in Albania was devastating. Confidence shattered. If Moise, bravest among them, no longer believed, who could? Mehmed wasted no time. Moise was sent back immediately, now leading 15,000 Ottoman troops. His task was as psychological as it was military: use his knowledge of Skanderbeg's tactics to destroy him. The armies met at Oranik. Moise was confident. He knew Skanderbeg's habits, his timing, his use of terrain. He deployed perfectly on paper. But he forgot one crucial truth. Skanderbeg knew that he knew. Instead of playing the expected game, Skanderbeg altered the rhythm. He held back his cavalry. He showed weakness. He allowed Moise to believe he was winning. And when Moise committed fully, Skanderbeg struck, not with subtlety, but with violence. He led the charge himself. The Albanian assault tore through the Ottoman formation with such ferocity that panic spread instantly. Moise's army collapsed. He escaped, but only just. Back in Istanbul, defeat carried no mercy. Mehmed's disgust was unmistakable. Moise understood his fate. He had betrayed brotherhood for ambition and gained nothing. So he made a final, desperate choice. He returned to Skanderbeg. At night, unarmed, a rope around his neck. Before the entire army, Moise fell at Skanderbeg's feet, awaiting death. In medieval war, treason demanded execution. Discipline required it. Skanderbeg looked down at the broken man. He saw fear. He saw regret. And then he did something no one expected. He removed the rope. He lifted Moise to his feet. He embraced him. By forgiving the unforgivable, Skanderbeg bound Moise with loyalty stronger than iron. Moise would serve faithfully until his death. But more than that, the act sent a message throughout the army. They were not fighting for a tyrant. They were fighting for a leader. And that loyalty would soon be tested beyond imagination. Because Mehmed the Conqueror was finished experimenting. In 1457, Constantinople had already fallen. Mehmed was no longer just a sultan. He was Caesar of a reborn empire. And Skanderbeg was more than an enemy. He was a symbol. This time, Mehmed sent an army of 80,000, and with it a dagger shaped like blood. Gjergj Kastrioti, Skanderbeg's nephew, raised beside him, trained beside him, and consumed by ambition. Hamza promised Mehmed his uncle's head. The Ottomans marched into the plains and found nothing. No resistance, no raids, no fires. Weeks passed. Discipline eroded. Confidence bloomed. They believed Skanderbeg had fled. He had not. He had hidden 20,000 men in the forests above them, waiting, watching. At midday, under brutal heat, Skanderbeg gave the signal. What followed at Albania was not a battle. It was annihilation. The Albanians descended like a storm. The camp collapsed in minutes. Tens of thousands fell. The river ran red. Hamza was captured alive. No forgiveness awaited him. He was imprisoned and sent away to rot, far from the land he sought to rule. Europe erupted in praise. Skanderbeg was called Athleta Christi. But he knew the truth. He had humiliated the conqueror, and Mehmed would come himself. The final storm was gathering. Pope Pius II died suddenly in Ancona in August of 1464. With his death, the crusade did not fail gradually. It vanished overnight. The banners were lowered. The ships turned back toward their home ports. Mercenaries packed their gear and disappeared. The flow of money stopped as if a hand had snapped shut around Europe's purse. Skanderbeg stood on the coast near Durrës, staring out across an empty sea that should have been filled with sails. The realization was brutal and absolute. No one was coming. There would be no grand fleet, no army of knights, no salvation riding in from the west. Europe was content to praise him as its shield, but unwilling to stand beside him in the shield wall. And Skanderbeg knew what that silence meant. Mehmed II had finished his other conquests. Trebizond had fallen. Bosnia had been broken. Wallachia had been subdued. Now the Sultan turned his attention back to the one jagged rock that still refused to sink beneath Ottoman power. He was finished with generals, finished with intermediaries. In the spring of 1466, the earth shook once more, not from a campaign, but from something closer to annihilation. At the front of the marching host, beneath golden standards and sacred banners, rode the conqueror himself. By summer, the Albanian sky was darkened not by clouds but by dust. Mehmed II, the man who had smashed the walls of Constantinople and extinguished the Roman Empire, was advancing with an army estimated at nearly 150,000 men. To understand the scale of this invasion, consider this. The army marching into Albania may have been larger than the entire population of the country it was meant to destroy. This was not a military expedition. It was a moving city of steel, fire, hunger, and will. Mehmed did not simply want Skanderbeg defeated. He wanted the mystery resolved. He had grown up hearing stories of this renegade commander. He had studied his methods, his habits, his defiance. In many ways, Skanderbeg was the only living man Mehmed truly respected, and that was precisely why he had to die. There could not be two suns in the same sky. Skanderbeg understood the math. If he met this force in open battle with his 15,000 men, they would be erased in minutes. So he made a decision that only the most ruthless leaders are capable of making, a decision that saves nations but scars them forever. He ordered scorched earth. Villages were evacuated. Fields of golden wheat were burned. Livestock that could not be moved was slaughtered. Wells were poisoned. Granaries were emptied and set aflame. When the Ottoman army arrived, they did not find a land to plunder. They found silence, ash, and starvation. Mehmed marched through a dead country. His supply lines stretched thin. Hunger gnawed at his soldiers before the first major engagement was even fought. But Mehmed was not his father. He was colder, more patient, and possessed of iron resolve. He pressed forward toward Gjergj. For the second time, the white fortress on the cliff was surrounded. This time, the cannons were larger, the bombardment relentless. The walls shook day and night. Inside the fortress, the garrison fought with the desperation of men who knew no mercy awaited them if they fell. Outside the walls, Skanderbeg waged his familiar war from the mountains, raiding supply caravans, striking camps at night, bleeding the army piece by piece. But Mehmed had learned. He fortified his camps, tightened discipline, and refused to chase the Albanians into terrain that turned numbers into liabilities. The result was a brutal stalemate. Enraged by defiance, Mehmed sought another way to break Skanderbeg's will. He turned his attention to smaller fortresses sheltering civilians, women, children, the elderly who could not flee fast enough. One such stronghold, cut off from water and dying of thirst, negotiated surrender. Mehmed swore they would be spared if they opened the gates. They believed him. What followed became one of the darkest episodes in Balkan history. Mehmed broke his word without hesitation. Soldiers were executed. Leaders were flayed. Families were enslaved or butchered. It was not merely a massacre. It was a message written in blood. This is the price of resistance. You cannot save them. From the mountains, Skanderbeg watched helplessly. Every day he fought, his people suffered. The scorched earth starved the Ottomans, but it starved Albanians too. Mehmed was proving he was willing to depopulate the country to win. Yet even the conqueror had limits. Winter was approaching. Courage still refused to fall. Disease spread through the Ottoman camp. Horses stripped bark from trees to survive. Mehmed realized he was trapped in the same strategic mud that had consumed his father years earlier. So he withdrew, but not without leaving a wound behind. Before departing, Mehmed ordered the construction of a new fortress in the heart of Albania. Built in just 25 days by massive forced labor, it was named Elbasan. This was not a battlefield victory, it was a chokehold. A permanent Ottoman dagger aimed at Albania's throat. Mehmed returned to Istanbul, claiming success. But privately, he knew the truth. He had brought the full weight of the Ottoman Empire against one aging warrior and a devastated land, and still failed to break them. Skanderbeg descended from the mountains into ruin. Fields were blackened. Villages lay empty. Elbasan loomed in the distance like a tombstone. He had survived, but the war of attrition was tightening its grip. Years of fighting had carved their toll. His beard had turned white. His body carried scars that never healed. Allies were dead, distracted, or distant. The dragons still breathed, but the fire was fading. And Mehmed was not finished. By the winter of 1467, Skanderbeg was in his early 60s, an age considered ancient in the 15th century. Most men were long dead by then. He was still riding, still armored, still fighting a war that had consumed his entire adult life. But he could see his country bleeding out. He needed grain money, men. So the old lion made one final journey, not to a battlefield, but to Rome. It was Christmas of 1467. Cardinals sat in velvet beneath golden ceilings. And into this opulent hall walked Skanderbeg, not as a triumphant prince, but as a worn general. His cloak was frayed, his face etched by sun and scars. He did not boast of victories. He pleaded. He told them Albania was the dike holding back the flood. If it fell, Italy would be next. He asked for troops. He asked for commitment. He asked for unity. He received applause. They praised him as the champion of Christendom. They gifted him ceremonial armor and enough money to keep his army alive for a few months. But they did not give him an army. Europe was too busy fighting itself. Skanderbeg returned home knowing he was alone. In January 1468, he called one final assembly of the League of Lezhë, planning new operations against Elbasan. Even now, he refused to stop fighting. But the enemy that finally reached him was not a blade or poison. It was malaria. The fever burned through the body that swords had failed to kill for 25 years. Confined to bed in Lezhë, the city where he had first united the clans, Skanderbeg weakened rapidly. When rumors arrived of Ottoman raids near Shkodër, instincts surged. Legend says he tried to rise, demanding his armor and horse, but his body failed him. His commanders wept. In his final moments, he did not speak of vengeance. He spoke of unity. Stay together. Do not fracture. On January 17th, 1468, Gjergj Kastrioti Skanderbeg died. When the news reached Istanbul, Mehmed II did not celebrate. He reportedly sat in silence before speaking words that would echo through history. Asia and Europe are mine at last. Woe to Christendom, for they have lost their sword and their shield. And he was right. Without Skanderbeg, the League fractured. Old rivalries returned. Fortresses fell one by one. Courage collapsed in 1478. Shkodër followed in 1479. The crescent rose over the Balkans and would remain for centuries. Yet before the final curtain fell, thousands of Albanians fled across the Adriatic to Italy. There, the Arborish preserved language, faith, and memory. While empires tried to erase Skanderbeg, his legend survived in songs, stories, and flags. Today, Albania still flies the red banner with the black double-headed eagle, the same symbol Skanderbeg raised in defiance. He did not win in territory. He won in time. For 25 years, he held back the tide. And sometimes that is enough to change history.